Hello and welcome to the review, the responses we got for the 10 questions for atheists.
What is going on with my camera?
They have properly been drinking and on drugs, so these answers are probably going to get better as they progress.
Getting massacred.
Just want to make sure that I can be heard, essentially.
What are you guys talking about?
Well, a lot of people are going to hate this, but typically I just use the term atheist.
You know, I think there's only the natural world. Reality is exhausted by nature.
That's the best face. That's the best face ever. I'm really happy with that.
We're going to get like
This is a philosophy channel now, and they're going to be reviewing this, so they will pick on you.
These questions really sound like they're written by a theist, right?
Hello and welcome to the responses to 10 questions for atheists. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And tonight we're going to be reviewing the responses we got to question 6. Now, question 6 was, what behaviors would you like to change from your fellow atheists or non-theists? I know in texts I wrote atheists and non-theists, but in the verbal question I actually wrote or. The point of that was, you know, atheists are a form of non-theist. Some people see all forms of non-theist as atheist. They don't see a difference in between. I've been doing my best to allow everyone to define themselves how they see fit. I didn't see any real need to niggle. I just wanted to make sure that the question was open to everyone and how they identify themselves. Now, tonight we've had a number of good responses, and the first one is from a pretty regular from the atheist and non-theist stream, and that's TMM. Question 6. What behaviors do you see from your fellow atheists or non-theists that you'd most like to change?
Well, something that I'd like to see less from everyone, and atheists are no exception to this, is knee-jerk anger. I find I have more interesting discussions with theists when I don't react to their sometimes clearly deliberate attempts to insult me. If someone leaves a comment on one of my videos that is full of insults, but there's also a substantive argument in among those insults, I have gotten pretty good at ignoring the insults and responding to the substantive arguments as though they had been presented politely. I engage with folks like that out of genuine curiosity about why they have the beliefs that they do, not to try to win anything.
So that was TMM, and he mentioned something that I know both you and I agree with here, Dave, and that's that knee-jerk anger.
Yeah, we see it a lot. Like, if you kind of criticize a bigger name than you in the atheist community, you'll have somebody jump down your throat and be angry at you, or if you put forward an argument that isn't kind of common, they'll turn around and insult you and mock you and sort of have a go at you. Everything seems to be this fight mentality that goes on.
That is something that's very common on social media in general. It's not just atheists here. You know, and as he said, atheists are no exception, and that's the point. It's everyone on social media. There is this sort of fight mentality. Everything is a battle to be won, and there is this anger to anyone that holds a different position towards you, and you go in and you attack. And there are people that have these phrases, right, that are like, attack the argument, not the person. But generally, they're not attacking the argument, they are attacking the person. And when they do attack the argument, they're not actually doing it very well. They're usually doing it in a very fallacious way. And what they should do is perhaps address the argument, perhaps explore the argument a little bit further, take time to understand the argument, question the argument, and maybe search for truth within the argument, and maybe go, oh, actually, yeah, no, I can see how parts of this seem to ring true, but these bits over here, you know, try and operate in a more cohesive and collaborative way with these conversations instead of seeing everything as a battle to be won.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for that one, TMM. And I mean, I think that's a really, really good point, especially when it gets to the point where everything ends up being insults. I mean, that's the most pointless point in any debate or conversation online, when it all becomes poo-flinging, essentially.
Yeah.
That's
We're
not what
supposed to
we're
be
here for.
risen apes, not monkeys in a cage.
So yeah, stop trying to win things. Try and learn things.
Yeah.
And even if you think you already know the answer, try and learn that maybe you don't. Anyway, enough of that one. Thank you very much, TMM. And next tonight we have Danish Debater, is it, Dave?
I think so, yep. Hang on. Yep, Danish Debater.
Awesome.
Okay, so this is an easy one, actually. I think there are three major issues I have. The first one is the tendency to jump to conclusions. This can be in debates, but it could also just be in community when we're talking back and forth. People tend to jump to conclusions about what people are saying, about what side people are on, and yeah, I think we're really bad at that. Another one is, I think we have some pseudo worship of some atheist figures going on sometimes, and this also weighs in on the first one. People jumping to defense of a person without even having read their argument simply because of who that person is. I think that is way too hasty to do that. Third, I see a lot of people doubling down on their own arguments after being shown to be at fault. Now, this is something that I see every side do, but I have a greater amount of experiences with atheists, and I think we have been really bad at this, especially as of late, sadly.
And that was Danish Debater with three pretty great answers. So the first one he spoke about there was jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, and we do often see this a lot. Like I had it happen to me the other day where I criticized an atheist or a fellow atheist, and they jumped straight to the conclusion that I must be a theist and started saying, well, your fairy in the sky isn't real. Okay. And there's a lot of jumping to conclusions about what somebody is saying, like an uncharitable reading and jumping to the worst conclusion and then arguing against that.
Yeah, it is absolutely terrible. It's something that we find incredibly frustrating. It happens even in our debate groups and stuff like that. And you're trying to have a conversation with someone, and you're trying to apply all the best methods of rhetoric that you know, and you're trying to approach every conversation as calmly as possible. You know you're not looking for a fight, and all of a sudden you've just said, so, you know, when you say this, can I confirm that you mean this? And bam, you're straw manning me. Oh God. Okay.
Yeah. And another popular one is, because you're arguing against them, you must be a troll.
Yeah. I hate that one, actually.
Yeah.
You're either a troll, or you're a theist, or you're an apologist. You're someone who's in the other camp. And if you're not someone who's in the other camp, you're a troll. And yeah, that's absolutely terrible. And as you mentioned as well, you know, it's not taking the time to understand the argument. And like TMM said, it's that knee-jerk anger. Because someone hasn't taken the time to understand exactly what you're saying, they're responding with some sort of knee-jerk reaction that doesn't actually represent what you're saying. They are essentially straw manning you, and if they're not straw manning you, they're misrepresenting you. And yeah, there are so many awful takes that you see. So I'm very much with you there, Danish Debater. I think these these jumping to conclusions, should I say, are not very helpful at all. And the next one that you actually bring up is the worshipping of atheist figures, essentially. Sometimes coming to the defense of them without even checking the arguments. I mean, we see this quite often with Aaron Ra's rock theism and other things people like Matt Dillahunty have said, haven't we, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I got into a discussion a couple of weeks ago, and the fans of the person that I was in the discussion with and criticizing came to one of my posts, and they were like, I can guarantee you that she's probably more right than you are because, or they're always right, and I can guarantee you that they know more than you do. It's like, well, how do you know when you haven't listened to what I've had to say? You know, what makes them more right? Is it simply because they're popular? And like you say, with Aaron Ra, it's like he obviously knows more about atheism than you do. Okay, but why? Yeah.
How do you quantify that sort of thing? I mean, how do you even quantify that sort of thing? There is no real way without giving some form of examination, I guess, about all the aspects of atheism that you could quantify someone knowing more about atheism. And from conversations I've had with someone like Aaron Ra, he doesn't really know much about the history of atheism, and he misrepresents it for his own gain. So the bits that he does know, I don't know if he fully knows and just misrepresents, or he's taken, operated on confirmation bias to find what he wants to present.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think the guy's an idiot. In fact, he's a very charismatic guy, and he's done a lot of good. I just think some of his more philosophical takes, and that is what atheism would come under, are a bit weak. And we've done he did that post a little while ago, "What is atheism?" that I did an entire response to, and he's a number of times provided a number of terribly weak arguments. And we see people coming to his defense because of who he is. He's obviously got his pride there. He's obviously got his pride. He's not backing down. I lost respect for him because he didn't actually look into the new information he was presented. I used to have a lot of respect for him because he was one of those people that seemed to change his mind when new evidence was presented to him. But from the conversations that we've had and the evidence that he's been presented and the fact that he just seemed to double down into his position and just reassert it and project a load of crap, it made me lose a bit of respect for him. But the problem, and this is what Danish Debater is saying here, is there's this almost worship of him, that there are people who just came to his aid and agreed with him because of who he is, not because of what he was saying. And they equally didn't look into the information. They equally didn't have a good rebuttal for anything that was said to him. It was just an argument from authority fallacy.
Yeah, basically.
But, atheists don't make fallacies. No, we don't do that at all. And actually, what I just said ties into Danish Debater's third point there, and that's atheists doubling down on their arguments even after being shown the fault with them.
Yeah, I mean, I can give a recent example of this. I was discussing empiricism with somebody not long ago, and they said, "You obviously don't know anything about atheism or empiricism." And I went, "Okay." And he goes, "Okay, describe empiricism to me." And I explained it to him, and he said, "No, that's not what empiricism is at all." So I took a quote from several dictionaries, philosophical dictionaries, encyclopedias, and whatnot, and sent them to him. And they they matched what I was saying and went against what he was saying. And he goes, what do you think those have to prove? Yeah. As if like, okay, you've shown me the evidence that you're right, but they don't prove you're right, and carried on with his line of argument that I didn't know anything about empiricism.
I mean, I've experienced the same myself, and it's so painful. I mean, speaking of empiricism, you actually have people that say, what does experience have to do with empiricism? And you're like, really? What do you think empiricism is? Like really, really, you might be thinking about scientific evidence, but even then, it's still rooted in empiricism. There is still that experiential part because of the observation and recording of said data. But do you really not know that much about empiricism that you think it has nothing to do with experience?
Yeah. So, you know, we've had like discussions about burden of proof. We've had discussions about like definitions of atheism, what constitutes evidence. And most people will double down on it, even when shown the contradictory evidence. And it's kind of painful to watch, and they'll be surrounded. Going back to the point made before, they'll be surrounded by people that come to their defense, you know, like fans and whatnot. And so they sort of reinforce the idea that the other person must be right, and they double down even more and double down even more. I mean, of course, it's not an atheist-only behavior, but that's what concerns us the most, because we're in the atheist community, like Danish Debater says.
Oh, most definitely. And actually, on that exact one, we've got an example of... so there was a TAP, Thought Adventure podcast, where they had Aaron Ra on, and they were discussing... the overall conversation was about a necessary being. And Aaron Ra was really out of his depth, and he really didn't know what was going on. And it was a shame to see him so out of his depth, actually. It was almost unfair to see him in that environment, because that's not his speciality. I did feel a little bit sorry for him. But what we saw after that were loads of comments from his supporters supporting him, telling him that he owned the conversation, which he didn't. He completely failed. And him talking to other people saying, yeah, well, everybody told me I did great. So he's had it reinforced into him that he knew what he was talking about, even though he really didn't. And that's the problem. Like, there is no one there telling him that actually you need to look into this a little bit more. You were out of your depth. You really handled that badly. Perhaps take a step back, learn a little bit about it, and have another conversation with these guys, or take it offline. Ask them, maybe, how could I have dealt with this better? Like, you know, what should I learn about what you're talking about? But, you know, that's point 2 and 3 in one.
I mean, it was that sort of thing and this sort of behavior that Danish Debater is mentioning that made me create the Atheist Echo Chambers and Dunning-Kruger video.
Which is an absolutely fantastic video, and I think everyone should check out. It's generally going to be one of those ones that is rejected by pretty much everyone that it applies to, unfortunately. But what can you do? At least if the information's out there and it maybe makes one person who is in that echo chamber go, oh, maybe I should think about things a bit more, then we've at least done something positive.
Yeah.
So next tonight is the Emerson Green stream, which I'm really looking forward to discussing.
Yeah.
So I guess I can start. Stop calling religion a mental illness. That's that's not what. Oh, hang on. So anyway, you guys are muted right now, just so you know. But yeah, I mean, that's not what mental illness means. That's not what religion is. It's just a horrific misuse of language. And it's insulting, and it obviously like just drags the level of the discourse down. And it's just not true. So please stop doing that. And I would also just say, like, stop avoiding the burden of proof. Like, don't say there are no arguments for atheism. Like, there are arguments for atheism. There are good arguments for atheism. Like, there's no reason to run from making a positive case here. So, like, it takes a little work, but like, it can be done. So that's what I would say.
For me, it's like just like all of the sort of like all of the sort of behaviors that like almost like new atheism was sort of like memed out of existence. It's like, I mean, there's new 15-year-olds every year, so there's always going to be more people who display that sort of behavior. But it's like, I don't know, I don't really see it much anymore except online, and so it's like, just being a douche to other people because of like what they believe, and it's like there's always the way just to be pleasant and not mock them, and just be generally charitable to what their position might ultimately amount to.
So that was Emerson Green and Necessary Being from the Emerson Green stream. The first one brought up by Emerson there was religion or theism as a mental illness, which is a pet peeve of ours, and especially Bearded Heretic and anyone that actually works in the mental health industry.
Yeah, if you go to Shannon Q's channel, you'll find a very long stream or a very long video from Shannon explaining why it's not a mental illness. We've done a stream on it, and Luke, Bearded Heretic, has also done one on his own channel as well. And it doesn't qualify as a mental illness, and it's really just an excuse to make yourself sound superior or make them sound crazy. It's basically an ad hominem without the I'm dismissing your argument because you're mentally ill. And you're kind of poisoning the well. And it's just like Emerson says, it's degrading and insulting, and it lowers the discourse.
Not to mention, it creates a stigma against those who are actually mentally ill, and those who might be suffering with mental illness might be less inclined to actually get help, but because of the way you're treating them, and they might be your friend, and the way you talk about religion being a mental illness, they might be someone who is actually suffering with a mental illness, and they can't trust you, your best friend, to get some advice on what they should do because of how you treat other people who you think are mentally ill. So there is an actual other layer that you should really consider here as well. It's not only a terrible argument against religion, but it's a really terrible disservice to those who are actually mentally ill.
Yeah.
He also mentions stop avoiding the burden of proof.
Yeah.
Which again is another pet peeve of Dave's and mine. And we've tried to explain what the burden of proof is on different belief positions a number of times. And unfortunately, it's a conversation that gets us othered, like we were talking about previously, about how people have these knee-jerk reactions and say, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about, and things like that. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that happens when people don't really understand what the burden of proof is and who it applies to. Dave, would you like to give a really brief overview, because I know we've done streams on it, but a really brief overview of what the burden of proof is, at least when it's applied to an online discourse or even an online debate?
I mean, You could put it down simply in terms that a lot of people use, like the burden of proof is on the one making the claim. And I suppose some say the burden of proof is on the one making the positive claim. So in an online discourse, you're going to have the original claim and then the other person's claim about that claim. And each one of those would carry a burden of proof. And the burden of proof isn't to prove it absolutely true. It's just to justify your position, show that it's rational. And if the attempt is to change the other person's mind, give enough of a good enough argument to change that other person's mind.
Yeah.
It's not like science. It's just a discourse.
One of the things that actually comes up quite common as well is the comparison to the courts, which I find incredibly intriguing because it's a misrepresentation of what is there. They say, well, it's the prosecution's position. They've got to prove their case. But you imagine if you were the person who has been accused and your defense lawyer goes, well, no, I'm not going to do anything. They just have to prove their position. No, actually, your lawyer will do everything they can to not only disprove individual bits of the evidence that the prosecution present, but also present counter evidence to prove that you weren't the person there doing the thing that you have been accused of. So there is this weighting that goes on with this burden. It is not just on the person making the claim. And it's when it comes down to a belief position, isn't, as Dave says, it's not necessarily to prove true. Even with a claim, it's not necessarily to prove absolutely true. It's just to give enough evidence to warrant a resolution that, yes, this seems most likely to be true. But when it comes down to something that is just a belief, the burden comes down to your mental state. It's to prove that your reasoning is rational, that you're justified in believing what you do believe or don't believe. So rather than justifying that this thing is true, if you're claiming this is true, yes, you've got to justify this is true. If you're saying that I believe this is true or I believe this is false, then it should be justifying your reasoning. And if you're not saying either of those things, if you're just lacking belief, if you don't believe it is true or false, you just lack belief both ways, man. Okay, justifying why you don't believe it true and why you don't believe it false. Because there are great reasons. There are great reasons for any of these positions. And some of them are more convincing than others. And I'm compelled by all the justifications that I've heard to believe that gods don't exist. Right? And when I hear someone say, I don't have to support my position, I only lack belief, but you're wrong, I sit there and go, what are you talking about? How are they wrong? How are they wrong? Justify why they are wrong. Well, I'm not trying to convince them. Then why are you getting involved in this conversation at all? Why are you getting out here telling people that they're wrong, that they're idiots, that they're mentally ill, if you don't actually have something to say? If you cannot add any quality to this conversation that can maybe be discussed and make it taken further, why are you even here?
I mean, just to bring it back to the kind of discussions that you would generally see, somebody says God is real. Somebody says I don't believe you. The burden of proof is on you. The believer then gives his reasons. You'll generally get one of a few answers. That's not evidence. And then that is a claim, and a positive claim about what's been presented to you, that what they presented isn't evidence. So it's on that burden then, that person then has a burden to show that it isn't evidence. And another popular claim is, well, you haven't met your burden of proof. Theists haven't met your burden of proof. That's another claim, and a positive claim, being made by somebody. So they then have a burden to show that the other person hasn't met their burden of proof. And just to go back to something that Emerson was saying, I've heard it a lot. You'll have atheists say, well, there are no arguments for atheism. Atheism is just not believing. And I think that's caused by a disservice that many of the popular atheists say, where atheism is just not believing. You don't need arguments to not believe. But there is a whole wealth of literature out there arguing for a positive case for atheism. And I've heard it say, well, atheism isn't taught in universities. There's no class on atheism. Well, yes, there is. It's taught as part of a philosophy degree. Dan Magnabasco, or something his name is, he was the originator of street epistemology. He actually ran a class on atheism in his college or university. Can't remember which one it is in America. But yeah, people need to understand that atheism is a thing beyond not believing as well.
Well, especially as you understand that atheism is polysemous. And usually, not always, usually within philosophy, at least philosophy of religion, it is seen as the proposition gods do not exist, with the atheist accepting this proposition as true. So there are arguments to accept that. That's why theists might say if atheism is true, it's because they understand this propositional use of atheism. And most atheist philosophers adhere to this use within philosophy as well. It's not just theists. Obviously, atheism is polysemous, but there are even arguments as to why you should lack a belief. And there are arguments over the definitions of atheism, why it should be a lack of belief or why it should be the belief gods don't exist. So there are so many arguments for atheism, whether it's about the definition or whether it's why you should hold it to be true or why it's you should not believe in gods. There are arguments on all sides.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this will show up because of the green screen.
No, it just made you disappear.
Yeah, damn it. It's Atheism, A Guide for the Perplexed by Kerry Walters. And that's a book on atheism and has arguments for atheism and all that different kind of stuff.
I'll try and remember to put a link in at the end. But when I don't remember, Dave, you remember.
Okay. Yeah, okay. And
hopefully, when we're doing the live stream on the way back, we'll remember that we haven't put it in, and then we'll put it in.
And then put it in.
Yeah.
Well, the other book I just tried to show was Atheism and Agnosticism by Graham Oppy, which is another brilliant atheist philosopher who has plenty of arguments for atheism. Go check them out.
Yeah. And I mean, the question 4 that we've done, obviously you're on question 6 now, so I imagine that if you're this far through our series, you will have heard question 4, where there were a number of arguments for atheism, or as we presented it at the time, against the existence of gods or various religions. So there were a ton presented right there for you to just take on board. Now, they didn't go into detail with those arguments, no, but you can look them up.
Good starting places.
Definitely. I mean, certain ones, the ones that always pop to the forefront of everyone's mind that a lot of atheists like and a lot of theists don't like, are things like the problem of evil and divine hiddenness. There are certain ones, and there's different types of problem of evil as well. So just start looking into those. They're arguments for atheism. They're arguments for God not existing. So there's a couple to start yourself on. Now, they're not necessarily the best arguments. They're not necessarily the most compelling arguments. But if you're someone that thinks there are no arguments for atheism, there are 2 arguments right there that are arguments for atheism. And I would agree that there are much better arguments out there.
Oh, yeah. But, you know, a lot of people don't get introduced to them because of the way a lot of atheist YouTubers are and atheists online are. And they're caught in this thing where there are no arguments for atheism. Unfortunately, you know, that's not the case. And I wish the bigger atheist YouTubers would expand more on it.
Yeah, most definitely. There are a few more and more so that are doing it, the more philosophically inclined that have lent that way. But you're right. The bulk of the big atheist YouTubers. Let's move on though.
Before we do, I'll just say go subscribe to Emerson Green because he has a couple of great videos on it.
He most definitely does. Is absolutely fantastic. And whilst we're naming a few names, Real Atheology is another channel that will present some great arguments for atheism as well. And do you know what? Both of them will happily discuss counters to the arguments that they're presenting, and they will be very fair in their analysis. They're people that you can really learn from.
Yeah, I learn a lot.
And also on the stream, there was Necessary Being, who quite flippantly mentioned, you know, all the new atheist types of behavior, and generally being a douche to other people and not being charitable, which I'd agree with. It's something that you do see online. Now, he brought up it being, you know, there's new 15-year-olds every year doing this sort of thing. My experience is that it's not necessarily the young people doing it. I mean, I've seen people that I've had conversations with that are definitely older than me. And the 2 ways I've confirmed that is by 1, asking them, and 2, seeing pictures of them. You know, okay, cool. I've had live conversations with these people as well. So it's not just a case of they're hiding behind a facade. There are people who've gone, I've been debating religion for 40 years. I know what I'm talking about. Prove it, prove it, prove it. Meme. And you're like, really? 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 I don't know. I find a lot of the behaviors that he's talking about, the new atheist types of behavior. Now, obviously, we've done streams on new atheism, and new atheism isn't necessarily these negative types of behaviors. New atheism is just supposed to be talking out against religion, you know, like addressing your concerns with religion, not staying silent. And you know what? That's something I can get behind. Respectfully trying to address certain things within religion that you don't agree with. Cool. I'm with you. I am completely with you. I think this is something that we should all do. What new atheism has become is something that is sometimes coined as New Atheism TM, which is this terrible take of immature, puerile, meme drop arguments from popularity, etc., style behavior that is just so incredibly irrational and pathetic. In fact, there's a couple of articles on our site that sort of relate to it. One of them is The Problem with New Atheism, and the other is Has Atheism Become an Ideology? And these address, I think, Necessary Being's concerns here. So check them out if you're actually more interested in that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So next tonight we have Godless Granny with another video.
Question 6. I would like to see non-theists be more charitable. I myself fail in this respect sometimes. I follow Vice Rhino Apologia religiously, as I think they are two of the best examples in the community at being able to get their points across, throw in sarcasm where appropriate, and yet still be charitable. We need to keep in mind that these people believe these things so strongly that to challenge this is to challenge their very identity. To get someone to think critically of their own viewpoint is a difficult thing. So I think we all, myself included, need to be patient and let people digest our points. On the other hand, it was the banner at the Ark encounter that said, "Genocide and Incest Park," raising my ire, that got me to listen to Aaron Ra. My intent was to refute what he was saying, but after hearing him, I knew he was right. So this is not an easy thing. There is a time and a place to be offensive, and sometimes being offensive is the way to get the attention needed to get your point across. But if we want to make rational appeals, we also need to keep our own emotions in check.
So that was Godless Granny, who we've had on a couple of times so far, and she mentioned that she'd like to see non-theists being more charitable.
Yeah, and this kind of links back to a couple of things that have already been said, like necessary being and TMM. Basically, it'd be nice to see atheists be less of an asshole, I guess. Actually kind of be charitable to the person, have a discussion with them, not mock them, try and take the best of what they say. Sure, sarcasm can happen in a conversation, like she says. Bit of wit, you know. I mean, they can add to a conversation if done right. But you still have to actually give the best interpretation of what that person is saying and address what that person is saying, instead of just dropping memes, calling them mentally ill, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, most definitely. And, you know, there is the thought along the lines of when you do challenge someone's beliefs, you are challenging their identity, and to be a bit understanding of that as well. Because there is that common meme of, you know, attack the belief, not the believer. But when you're attacking the belief, calling the belief stupid, it's basically saying the believer is stupid for believing the belief. So again, perhaps there's better ways to address things. She does mention, though, that there are times when you can address things and you need that sort of I don't know how to say it, but that sort of abrupt, you know, like, oh, thing that makes you reconsider your position, that makes you stop, or maybe makes you angry and thinks, I am going to try and prove you wrong, just so you listen to them a little bit more. Because if you're the sort of person that is willing to prove someone wrong, you're probably willing to listen to their argument so you know how to prove them wrong. So I can understand the shock tactic that sometimes comes out to just try and get someone to think. But I think a lot of the time you need a good rapport for these sort of tactics to actually have any impact. I mean, if we were to consider the difference between some random person on the internet calling me an idiot and Dave calling me an idiot, I'm going to listen to one person more than the other just because I have a good rapport with Dave. And if Dave says I'm being an idiot about something, he probably has a good point. He probably understands my psychology and goes, yeah, this is not you being the way you usually are, Joe. You're being an idiot. Whereas some person on the internet, I can quite easily pass that off as, well, what do they know they're talking about? You know?
Yeah. And I was just going to say, with regards to the attack the person, not the belief, and when you're attacking the belief, you are attacking the identity. One way atheists might be able to relate to this is, how often have we heard it said when you say, well, atheism has multiple definitions. One of them is the definition that belief God does not exist. And you'll have an atheist respond with, well, if we use that one, I don't get included as an atheist. And that has challenged their identity. You've challenged the belief, but they've seen it as an attack on their identity. Now think of something like Christianity, which is deeply entwined and entrenched belief. It's going to be the same, but on a higher scale.
On much higher scale. Equally, if you, to go one step further with your previous example, Dave, how many times have we tried to address perhaps the fallacies and the irrationality that can come out of certain definitions of atheism? Like the special pleading, or the fact that it can lead to absurd conclusions like rocks are atheists. So therefore, the definition could be concluded as an irrational definition because it is open to those interpretations. And that leaves the person going, well, you think I'm irrational for liking that definition. They feel that it's a personal attack on them. And you're like, no. I feel the definition is irrational because it can lead to these bad conclusions, or is open to things like special pleading. And this is how, and you can explain through it, and you can be completely calm, but it's still an attack on the personal identity. And yes, like you say, Dave, when you think about a deeply held religious belief, it is something that they've been brought up with. It goes through and through. It's something they share with their community. It is much, much different from your lack of belief that seems to actually be a big part of your identity that you claim you don't have.
Yeah, with religion, it's not just a definition, it's a lifestyle. So
yeah. And to be honest, that actually seems to be the way it is with a lot of atheism as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Godless Granny. And next tonight we have Luke, also known as Bearded Heretic.
This is a big question. Oh, can I pick more than one? Misusing scientific language, such as the null hypothesis, and etc. Null hypothesis is the main one. Falsifiability, people misuse. The burden of proof is misused a lot. What else? I don't know. There's lots of stuff. I think people are mean and judgmental and demeaning and patronizing and try to make excuses for other people's behavior that allows them to have some sort of power dynamic. Yeah. So I think all of that, like, the religious is a mental illness, which Chris has just brought up in the chat, that's to do with the patronizing, belittling aspect of it. It's the same thing with the Santa Claus argument, right? It's just this whole, like, not showing respect. And, like, you might have been mistreated by people who are religious in the past. I think, potentially that's the case. Or you might feel like you've been abused in your religious background, okay? But that doesn't mean you can insult and degrade someone halfway across the world who wasn't part of that system, right? Religions work very different in different countries. And in America, I think this is especially the case. It is bad. I won't, especially in the southern states, it is bad. But that doesn't mean that you have an excuse for being rude and angry and horrible to other people. Just it's not right. And also, yeah, misusing scientific language, not learning about the topics that you speak about, it's not okay. Like, if you're going to use a term and then someone corrects you because you're using it wrong, you should take that on board. You're supposed to be a skeptic or a critical thinker. Like, that's what most atheists call themselves. Actually listen to people. Listen to people who are experts in the field, who are saying, look, it's better if you use it this way. And then you'll be a better skeptic or a better critical thinker because you'll be using the terms in the correct way. If you say null hypothesis or mental illness and someone who's an expert in the field says that's not how those terms are used or that's not right, listen to them. If you're entrenched in your beliefs, you're not very skeptical or critical thinker, are you? Critical thinker. So yeah, I think it's the hypocrisy, it's the rudeness, It's the aggressiveness, it's the guardedness, and the misuse of terminology and not understanding what we're talking about. And that's it, basically, I think. I also want people to have a little interest in religion because they diss a lot of them outright without even knowing anything about them. And they're actually quite interesting. And it tells a story of human history. Religion's been a key part of our history, our development, and to just disregard it. Just because we use electric hobs now doesn't mean fire's out the window. Like, it's part of our society, and we need to look at that. Yeah, and we need to start to think about it and enjoy it. Like, and we might see it as mythology. That's fine, but it's not pointless, and it's bringing hope, joy, comfort, and community to a lot of people. There's stuff we can learn from religion.
So that was Luke, or Bearded Heretic, who brought up a number of things that have already been brought up tonight, but mentioned a couple that have not been said so far. And the first was the misuse of scientific language. So the first one he actually brought up was the null hypothesis, which is frequently misused. I mean, Dave, we hear things like atheism is the null hypothesis all the time, don't we?
Yeah, and the null hypothesis is not believing something. Yeah.
Both of those are wrong. Both Luke and I have videos on the null hypothesis. And realistically speaking, there's a couple of things to unpack there. I mean, a hypothesis has to be something that is testable in the first place, and it's talking about, for example, if we were to say an experiment on the efficacy of prayer, right? You'd have your first hypothesis, H1, and that would be people that are being prayed for would heal faster than the people who are not being prayed for. You'd have H2, maybe, that the people are being prayed for and know they're being prayed for. And you can build all of these different parameters, but the H0 would be that there's no considerable difference between the people who are being prayed for and aren't being prayed for, in recovery. And that would be your null hypothesis, right? These are things that can be tested for, and it's just showing that there's no significant statistical difference between all of your hypotheses, and therefore the null hypothesis presently is the one that is considered most likely. You may have future hypotheses and keep on testing, but that's what the null hypothesis is. It's not simply not believing or something not existing. So, yeah. And he also brings up falsifiability.
Yeah. I think people slightly misunderstand what falsifiability is. I mean, they kind of understand that a proposition must be falsifiable before they accept it. In other words, you must be able to you must be able to prove that proposition false, or they don't accept it. But a lot seem to think that in science, if something is falsified, it's discarded, which it's not. There might be a part of it that's discarded, a part of a theory that's discarded, but they'll continue on and retool it. And if we think about Newtonian mechanics, as it went along, scientists saw that a lot of it didn't work. Or, there were parts of it that didn't work, like you couldn't explain some orbits and things like that. But they didn't discard it. They just carried on using it because it was the best that they had. It's something that somebody like Thomas Kuhn talks about when he talks about scientific revolutions.
So, I mean, there you go. There's a couple of big bits. Now, a lot of atheists focus heavily on science, some even to the point where we'd say they are adhering to scientism. Yet they actually get the science wrong more often than not as well. Like embarrassingly so. But not only that, they get the burden of proof wrong, like has been mentioned so far. And yeah, there's just the general behavior of being arseholes, making excuses for those behaviors. As Luke brings up again, is the whole mental illness thing, the patronizing behaviors. I mean, Luke is very close to people who have mental health issues. That's the sort of area he works in. So he is a bit more sensitive to that argument as well. And there is a big difference between people who are religious or believe in God and those who are mentally ill, especially those who are severely mentally ill. So, yeah. And as he mentions, not actually learning about the topics that they're discussing. We have that all the time with things like morality and epistemology. And then not actually listening to the people who have spent the time looking into those topics. So all of his points, really, apart from the scientific language ones we've already addressed tonight, but it's just showing that this is something repeated from people who have quite a good voice, who have their finger on the pulse, who are not just following the crowd. It's something that should be listened to, something that we very, very much agree with ourselves. I think that we atheists can and must do better.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've even had people say to me, just because you've studied epistemology doesn't mean you know anything about it. Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's just speaking about their own experience in education more than yours. I mean, there's definitely subjects that I've studied in school that I paid no attention to, but like not subjects I've got degrees in. I mean, like you have, Dave.
Yeah.
Like it takes a lot to have degrees in specific topics. You have to know at least something to be able to get those degrees. You might
have to know a website to download them and print them out. So.
All right, Kent. But yeah, so next tonight we've got Rev N Fidel.
Quit using theist arguments like it's impossible to prove that gods exist, or you can't prove a negative and shit like that. Those are what theists have been saying for years and years and years. And some kind of ninja move, they've got atheists saying that kind of stuff. So quit saying that. Quit being martyrs. You're never going to out-martyr the Christians. You're never going to out-persecution complex the Christians. Just kind of suck it up and be a better example than they were.
And that was Rev with another snappy response, incredibly insightful whilst he was at it. And he basically says that we should stop letting Christians control the conversation, and we should stop using things that Christians have been saying for years. For example, things like it's impossible to prove God does not exist and you can't prove a negative.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose these could be being carried forward from when they were believers. And so they're just using the same arguments, thinking that they're true. But they also use it against fellow atheists. Like, how many times have we been told, oh, no, you can't argue God doesn't exist because you can't argue a negative. And then when you show them that you can prove a negative, they sort of narrow it down more and more and more and more until you get to the point where they go, see, you can't prove some negatives. Yeah. It's like, okay, but, that's not a controversial claim. It's also not what you said. Or you can't prove God doesn't exist. Well, okay, you can't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, but you can prove it to a degree of certainty enough to be rational to accept that belief.
Especially with specific God claims, which are shown to have contradictory properties. They're essentially logically impossible. And if something is logically impossible, then it's not conceivable. And if it's not conceivable, then it doesn't exist. So at least that God, as claimed, does not exist. And therefore, you have proved that negative. Sure, as you mentioned, someone can move the goalpost and say, yeah, but, well, maybe it's like this, maybe it's like this. Sure, that's fine, that's fine. You know, there are certain negatives out there that you cannot prove. I mean, people sometimes go, well, okay, but what's meant by that is there are, you can't prove that a metaphysical entity can't exist, does not exist. And then you go, okay, well, what about things like square circles or, triangles with 7 sides? And they go, yeah, but I don't mean like that. I mean like a metaphysical being that's da-da-da-da-da. And, it's this whole moving goalpost thing's trying to get to a point where they can say, aha, see, I told you so, that you can't prove that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And one of the things that kind of amuses me about it is when you think about the definition of atheism, they'll argue that the belief God does not exist was created by religious people. They reject that kind of religious language. They don't want religion controlling how they use words and what they think. And yet here they are doing exactly that with these things. And in some ways, I guess you could say it relates to this allergy to the word belief.
Yeah.
And that's another example of them allowing religious people to control their language and control how they think, even if they don't realize that's what's going on.
I mean, a good example of this is people who are reclaiming identities through words that have been used in a negative way throughout history, like the word fag or gay. They had become insults, especially through my childhood. And, you actually see this word has been reclaimed by homosexuals, and they use it in a more positive way again, and they don't take it as an insult. And if someone calls them that, it's not taken as an offensive slur. It's that's me sort of thing. And that's the sort of thing that we atheists need to do with things like the word belief. Yes, I do believe in evolution. Yes, I believe that it supports the most credible explanation of how life diversified on this planet. Yes, I definitely accept that this theory. When you accept something as true, that's what you believe to be true. There you go. And I think we need to reclaim these religious words that we feel have a bad taste in our mouth. Sure, if you feel the need to not use them, right? If they leave a dirty taste in your mouth, I can understand finding other language you find more appropriate. Cool. But what would be even better is reclaiming these words and taking the religious context out of them and having them accepted as non-religious things.
Yeah.
So next tonight we have Dujaun.
In terms of the discussion surrounding religions, I like for folks to be more receptive and respectable towards each other. Atheists, come on, stop being assholes.
So pretty short and sweet from Dujaun, and it's basically reflecting everything else that we've seen here tonight. Stop being assholes, be more receptive to what the other person is saying, and be more respectful to each other. I don't think that we could really sum it up any better than that.
Nope, that's perfect.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that, Dujaun. I don't have anything that I can say to add to that statement. And in fact, actually, we should have probably just played your video and just left it as that for the entire night. So last on the cards tonight is Ozien.
I was just talking about this today. So people say they believe in science. I'm like, it's not a belief system. There's no prescriptions on how to live your life based on science. I really don't like it when atheists say that. Oh, I believe in science. That's why I don't believe in a God. I'm like, science has no opinion on God. Science doesn't demonstrate there is or is not a God, at least yet. Maybe at some point we'll be able to prove the existence of something supernatural. I don't know how you would do that with science, because science is the study of the natural world. Maybe we need a new type of science, but we have to prove there is a supernatural to even investigate it. However we investigate that, whatever tools we need to do that. And I'm not convinced by anything I've seen about anything supernatural, and I'm sort of a skeptic in that regard. And I've had personal experiences, and I can describe them maybe at some other time. But upon investigation, I found the cause for most of them, and they were natural causes, medical in one case, I believe, and stuff like that. So, so stop saying you believe in evolution. Stop saying you believe in science. You accept evolution as the best theory of life, or how life came to be. That's a good answer, and theories are true as far as we know. They're just the best explanation of the physical reality that we see, which are theories. It doesn't mean that theory is true. It's just the best knowledge we have, the best explanation we have based on the evidence. And but it's the evidence that proves the theory to be true. It's not the theory that proves the evidence to be true, sort of, right? So like arguments for theism, there's no evidence to support those arguments. So they're not theories, they're just an hypothesis that is true. And I need some evidence to demonstrate, some testable thing to demonstrate your hypothesis to be true.
So that response was from Ozien, and there is a mixed bag of tricks in there. There were some things that I could get on board with, and some things that didn't really sit right with me. The first thing he mentions was stop saying things like, I believe in science, and that it's not a belief system. But believing in something doesn't make it a belief system, does it, Dave?
No. And this is kind of a pet peeve of mine with people saying, I don't believe in evolution, I accept the facts. And Ozien is sort of saying the same thing here. Science isn't something you believe in, you accept the information. It's not a belief system in and of itself, so you don't believe in it. But Emma isn't a belief system, but I believe in her. I believe in her ability to do well, all that kind of stuff. I believe in science's ability to make future testable predictions and to come up with good medicines. To believe in something doesn't even just speak particularly to existence, but I believe in the existence of science. It's pretty obviously there. We have medical advancements because of it. And something that is sort of related to this, but it's about the believing in evolution. Richard Dawkins once said, the evidence is so strong for evolution that any sane, educated person has got to believe in evolution. So here he is using those terms. He doesn't seem to have a problem using those terms. Now, you could say anyone who says they believe in science or believes in evolution doesn't understand science. But that seems like a bit of a stretch if you're going to say that Richard Dawkins doesn't understand evolution or science. I think it goes back to what we were just saying with Revs about people having this allergy to the word believe, not understanding what it means.
Exactly. I mean, when you're talking about believe in, generally you're talking about having like trust or confidence in something. So a term like believe in science is you trust that science, or you have confidence that science will give us the answers, right? You maybe accept that science is the best method of investigation. And he mentions, stop saying you believe in evolution, you accept evolution, which is sort of something Dave was alluding to there with the Dawkins quote. Again, if you believe in evolution, you have confidence that the theory of evolution is the best explanation for the diversification of life on this planet. That is what you're saying with I believe in evolution. Yes, you accept evolution because you believe evolution to be true.
I mean, the thing here to say as well is, why would you accept something as true that you don't believe? Because by saying you don't believe it or believe in it, you're saying that you don't think it's true. So you're essentially accepting something as true, even though you don't think it is true.
Yeah.
I suppose you could say it's a semantical argument, but, it's what the words mean.
No, I agree. It's like if someone says, I don't believe I'm human. I accept I'm human. Well, you don't believe you're human. What do you believe you are then? Well,
Yeah.
I don't need belief because I know, but knowledge is a subset of belief. So if you don't believe, then you don't know. So how, if you do know, it gets really frustrating and confusing.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to Rev's point where he says, stop allowing the religious to control how you think and the words that you use.
I agree. I mean, he did make a couple of points there. It's like, belief in science doesn't discount God. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And I think that's right. I mean, just because you accept science doesn't mean that, you've proved God to be false. You might have, from a young earth creationist view, if you accept all the scientific theories or believe all the scientific theories to be true. But science is the study of the natural, as he mentions, and I agree with him there. So this is the problem that you sometimes see. Well, I accept science, that's why I believe gods don't exist. Okay, but science deals with the physical, and God is a metaphysical entity. So how have you used science to address something metaphysical? And he mentions within his video that currently there's nothing within science that tests for the supernatural. And cool. I mean, I do agree with him on those points.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with regards to the science doesn't disprove God, there are plenty of scientists who are believers in God. They're still scientists, so it's obvious that there is no actual entailment that accepting science means you have to disbelieve in God.
Oh, exactly. So on that front, there are, like I said, there are some things I agree with you there, but I feel like there's this sour taste in your mouth about the word belief or believe in, and I don't know why that's there exactly. I mean, it could just be from your interactions with believers, and that has made you averse to the word belief. And fair enough, I do understand it. I hear it a lot, and there's probably times in my past where I've said I don't believe, I accept too. But the hope is to make you aware that, the definition of a belief is something you accept as true or think likely or have a positive attitude towards. So therefore, if you do accept something, you do believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the videos tonight, which has been quite interesting, Dave.
Oh, yeah. There's been a lot of very good answers, and there's been a theme with the please stop being assholes. But most of the answers were very different. some overlapping, but some really good unexpected ones, like Rev's.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think I'm quite encouraged by a lot of the responses that we got tonight. Like you said, the theme of stop being dicks to other people. You know, however they phrased it, you know, don't be a dick. And I agree with that. Unless you're being really, really funny, don't be a dick. And I wish that was applied more thoroughly in the online community and, you know, everywhere that we see through social media. I find it incredibly frustrating all the time getting involved in these conversations, and especially among other atheists who you're trying to have a conversation with, and they might not be aware of a particular piece of information. And you're not saying, you know, trying to have this conversation with them that they have to accept that they have to, you know, talk about the definition of atheism. They don't have to accept a different use. They just have to be made aware that there are other uses. And they go, well, that just doesn't make sense. And you go, well, I'll explain it to you if you like. Yeah, go on then. And then you go, okay. You explain it to them, well, that just sounds like mental masturbation or something like that. And you're just like, well, like, what? Why are you taking it that way? I've explained using the rules of logic, propositional logic, how atheism can be defined as a proposition rather than just merely a lack of belief. I've explained how ism is used and how ist is used, and, you know, how all of the language and linguistics work to actually make this particular definition, and how it is the most common definition within philosophy. But because you prefer your definition, you reject it because of what? Exactly. Oh, well, yeah, it just sounds like bullshit to me. It just sounds like higgledy-piggledy psychotic stuff. Like, you haven't actually got a reason. And you get this really frustrating sort of aggravation back from atheists who are shown that maybe they don't have all the answers. And we don't have all the answers. You know, if we did have all the answers, we'd actually be able to prove to you that your gods don't exist. I mean, we believe they don't exist, and we think we've got pretty strong arguments for why they don't exist. But if we genuinely had all the answers, yet there are atheists out there who are so firm in their positions that even suggesting that they might not know everything about the definition of atheism gets their back up, and they go on the attack and they get offensive. And you're just like, really? Like, why? What's the purpose behind that? Like, you and I are both atheists. Why are you getting so agitated with me? Why are you causing aggravation? Why are you insulting me now because I've mentioned that there's a different definition to that you're aware of? Now, I'm not saying you have to use it. I'm just letting you know that there's another definition.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that is so frustrating. And we care about it more from our side. Like, when we see theists using it, you know, we're just like, another fundy theist, you know, and that's fine. But when we see other atheists doing it, we don't like the fact that they're representing us, you know, they're an example of who we are, essentially, because we are atheists. We may have a different ontological position, which debatably, you know, you can get into that whole definition debate if you want. But at the end of the day, we all identify as atheists. So therefore, we're all representing each other. And there are these people out there that are not behaving in the way that we want attributed to us.
Especially the religion is a mental illness part.
Yeah. There are so many bad takes. And honestly, I hope that there are a number of atheists that will listen to tonight's, video, Perhaps if you're more interested, there's the shorts. Sci-fi shorts actually address a number of takes that we atheists get wrong, especially the bad atheist memes sci-fi shorts, but all of them are things that we quite often misunderstand. And there's also on the Answers in Reason website, there's the bad atheist arguments. You know, they're things that we atheists could do better on. Like, a lot better on. Like, seriously. Like, super serial, okay, guys? But yeah, anyway. I hope you guys have enjoyed the stream, and I hope that there is at least some sort of accordance out there, and you guys perhaps can appreciate what we've said tonight and can take on board the fact that we've said a number of different things. Now, I know there are a lot more videos as well that we didn't address. There's reasons for that. I feel like we've addressed them in the comments. There are a lot of the common themes that happened in the other videos, and obviously this video is already long enough without addressing them again. And there were some people that basically didn't get the question, or some people that turned it into a conversation about the definition of atheism and then got prescriptive with the definition of atheism at the same time. And you're just like, really? Like, come on. I tell you what, that's one behavior I want to change. The prescriptivism around the definition of atheism. Yes, I have a preferred definition myself, right? I wish everybody used atheism in the propositional sense, but I do not expect you to identify that way just because I wish it, right? The people that go on about how it's only a lack of belief, or atheism is the default position, or all of those arguments, they're the ones that I would add on tonight as ones that shouldn't be argued for. Dave, are there any that you feel that weren't addressed tonight that should be addressed as well?
No, they all the different answers combined together pretty much hit all the notes for me.
Ah, fair. Cool. Only me who's a little bit more angry than you then.
I'm too old and knackered to be angry.
Fair enough. Anyway, as I said, I hope you've all enjoyed the video. I hope you learned from it, and hopefully some of the links that we've provided throughout the video you've found quite enjoyable as well. And yeah, you've been watching Answers in Reason, and we've been answering the 10 questions for atheists. And this was question 6.